Kevin Marks, who's done a lot of really amazing things. We've got sort of a nice long list. Kevin was one of the principal engineers at Technorati. He's worked at the BBC and worked at Apple helping with the Quicktime format. You've been involved with helping to define blogging and podcasting. Your blog, Epeus Epigone, did I pronounce that? Yeah, correctly? And currently you're a dev advocate at Google for OpenSocial. So you've done a lot of really cool things.
I've been around quite a while, so yes. But the way technology works is you keep moving to new things.
Yeah.
So you find something interesting, and then the world moves on. You find something else interesting to do. So I've found that I've done that quite a lot. Yeah. From doing digital video to doing blogging to now doing work at OpenSocial. So there is a thread of continuity there, but a lot of it is seeing, oh, there's something interesting over here and changing direction.
So what might that common thread be? Is there kind of a common thread through it?
The thread for me is it's sort of this sort of weird intersection where people and media and computers meet. That's the sort of three-way overlap, and that's been, different bits of it have been emphasised at different places. So initially, getting video working at all on a computer was hard work, and so the people side was smaller. And then with the blogging work, the people side was more emphasised and the media side was emphasised. And with OpenSocial, it's sort of back to it's still people, media, and computers, but it's computer representations of relationships, but also people becoming mediators for each other's media. And one of the most interesting things about this is watching how we're moving from a one right answer model for finding media to a here's what I'm interested in because here are the people who are recommending things to me. So even with very simple thumbs up, thumbs down filtering, or yes, I like this, or even I've just looked at this filtering, from people you already know, you can get interesting information from that. So that's something I'm seeing sort of in the social world that maps back to the blogging and the video world.
Right. So within your career, what are one or two things that you're really proud of in the sense of kind of what you were just talking about?
Natural English resonance is going to come out here. I was, a lot of these things are something like, well, what was that now? I was very proud working on a CD-ROM with Douglas Adams for The Last Chance to See. I really enjoyed doing that, but now this, Stephen Fry's off in Africa filming 15 years on or whatever for that, and the old CD-ROM looks sort of clunky and odd, but it was very exciting at the time. I was very proud to be part of Quicktime broadcasting and video capture on OS 10. I like to be able to say, if you've captured video on OS 10, that was running my code. That may not be true anymore, probably the code's gone by now, but that was that was nice. But it's more that the things I'm proud of is where looking at something and sort of simplifying and clarifying it can make some sense, and that can have a broader impact. So the stuff with microformats, where we basically said, well, couldn't we just use HTML to represent data? Why do we need to define something else? And then take that constraint and work that through. That was nice. Or the work with OpenSocial, where we said, here's a lot of people doing the same thing, but they're not talking to each other. Can we make them talk to each other and standardize that? I'm very excited about that. But those are things that are harder to point out and say, you're running my code. It's much more these days of, here's a bunch of ideas that I've helped catalyze and fit together, and I can't take credit for all of Microformats or all of OpenSocial in any respect at all. But if I've been part of helping people to converse and connect about that's what I'm proud of.
All sorts of interesting questions. You got to work with Douglas Adams. What was that experience like?
He was a lovely guy. He was very, 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 very smart, very interesting to talk to. And I still keep citing him. He wrote this wonderful piece in 1999 about the internet that I just cannot resist citing at every opportunity because he got so much right. Because he talked about the move from an oral culture, a village culture, to a mass media culture in the 20th century, and how the culture became one way. And what happened at the end of the 20th century is we started getting two-way culture back, and the ability to speak to each other rather than just listen to something from a broadcast. And there's an enormous amount of wisdom in this thing he wrote in 1999 that means I still end up quoting it in half the talks I give because it's such a powerful thing and so well stated. So I was, I was shocked when Douglas died, because I was hoping that he'd be able to, help explain this stuff for years to come. But even so, the stuff that he wrote, 10 years ago, or not nearly 10 years ago, is still very relevant to what we're doing now. To some extent, he was living in the future because, I suppose partly because he had more money to spend on technology than most people had. But he wrote a whole bunch of things saying, why is it we have to use cables for everything? And why does everything have a different power supply and stuff? Which if you look at now, we have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, we have standardized USB charge, we have a whole bunch of stuff like that. And there's this stuff that he wrote 10, 15 years ago that was pointing out the problems with the technology, but in a witty and funny way that made people stop and think about it. And you find that someone who can generate good metaphors like that can inspire people to do things further on. It's like the cell phones being flip phones because of Star Trek. Mm-hmm. There's lots of things that Douglas did that makes technologists stop and think. Mm-hmm. And you go, oh yeah, that's kind of like that, isn't it?
So if he were alive today, looking at the field of things like Twitter and OpenSocial and what's going on with those kinds of things, how do you think he would view that?
Well, I think he'd be in the middle of it playing with it. Mm-hmm. Remember, he invented the wiki pretty much. He built this thing. I remember way back in the late 80s, he did this book called The Meaning of Life, which was you take a place name out of a signpost and make up a word, use it as a word for something that we don't have a word for, and so make up definition. And he wanted to do this as a sort of public contributed project, and there wasn't a way to do that. I mean, we had sort of debate like this. This was in the CD-ROM age. The web wasn't really there yet. But the project he did do later was H2G2, which was effectively, it was an early wiki, and it was initially hosted through one of his companies, and the BBC hosts it now. And it's kind of a sort of comedy Wikipedia. It's like, the idea was it was building the Hitchhiker's Guide, but people can edit it and add jokes to it. So there was a whole bunch of stuff they dumped into it that his group blocked, but it became editable. So that this was a few years before Wikipedia, and it had a much more jokey nature to it, but it's still there up on the web, and it's still findable. So he was thinking about this stuff and trying to make this happen, often before the technology will let it actually happen. Right. So a lot of what we've done since has been implementing bits of these things that he talked about and trying to avoid the pitfalls that he made fun of in his stories. So I still see him as an inspiration.
So you always carry a towel around with you?
I think we did get to, one of the Google developed things was making towels, which I thought was very cool.
Nice.
We should do that again.
So you've been an early creator of so many things. I'd love to hear about things like blogging or video, where you see us in 2008, and what you're surprised you thought was going to happen. I mean, in the 90s, for example, doing CD-ROMs and doing video. Where do you see us today in terms of obviously social media, relational media, and things that are multimedia? And where are you surprised that we're not?
Well, the thing is, I mean, part of being old and having done this before is age is a high price to pay for wisdom, somebody said. Mm-hmm. But part of it is that I keep seeing people making mistakes I've already made. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole bunch of sort of classic pitfalls which tend to be taking an old metaphor and then extending it too far into the new world. And again, Douglas had a great thing about this. He talked about, in the early days of television, what they basically did was point a camera at the proscenium arch of a theatre and film that statically. And it took a while for them to realise that if you do cutaways and close-ups, you can do something different and do a different kind of storytelling, because they were used to the theatre, and the theatre you're sitting a long way back, and all you can see is people like that. So that was his sort of metaphor for some of the things we were trying to do interactive storytelling when we were used to linear storytelling. And I think the same problem runs through lots of these media, is that we see them as simulacra of previous media, and that leads to two traps. One trap is it then becomes a battle, is when is blogging going to replace newspapers, which is this sort of boring debate that's been going on for 10 years. But you also get this problem that you're trying to model something else. That can be useful. Wikipedia is trying to model encyclopedia. That gives a context that means that the edits can work in that way, but it also sets up conflicts like the deletionist inclusionist debate of, well, this shouldn't be, this isn't important enough to be an encyclopedia, we should delete it, as opposed to, well, it's a database. How, you know, what are you wasting by putting something there that nobody goes to?
Storage is cheap.
So yeah, storage is cheap, debate is expensive, but that's, so you know, there are sort of seeds of conflicts there. But there are other metaphors that cause these problems too. There's a sort of couple of pernicious ones in video. One is liveness. I realized, you know, I built the live broadcasting infrastructure for Quicktime, and then it was like, okay, I've built live broadcasting, what can we do with this? And the thing is, we realized there isn't actually that much you can do with it. Or rather, there's things you can do with it, but it's almost always better when it's not live. When something's live, it has mistakes in it, the quality's at the mercy of momentary fluctuations in the internet and so on. And if you actually sit there and watch live TV, the only reason you're watching live TV is you're waiting for something to happen. So you're watching baseball and most of it is boring and there's a few little bits where it's exciting. Or you're watching, you know, the presidential election waiting for the outcome. Or you're watching some news thing. And the live bits of this are generally people filling dead air waiting for something to happen, saying, well, I expect somebody's going to come out of a car soon. And, you know, and I began to realize that this was actually a recipe for, you know, not stuff that isn't very interesting. The thing that is interesting about live is when it's two-way. That's the only time you actually need it. So once you build a, you know, once we built iChat AV, it was fairly obvious where live is useful because you're having a conversation with somebody else. And, you know, like just we launched video chat in Gmail this week. It's the same thing. That's useful. You can see there's somebody there. There's a little green camera next to their name. You can click on it and talk to them. iChat had that long ago. It was 8 years ago. I don't know, around that. Google just put it into Gmail. It's still a valuable thing because it's like, okay, I can talk to that person now. I know I can do it. And you can have a conversation. It's back and forth. That's a useful use of live video. But to say, okay, we're talking to each other on video here, we should be doing this live onto the internet, isn't actually useful. That means that people have to make an appointment to go and watch it at that time. There isn't a strong value if they can't feed anything back to us. There's no value for them in it being live. They'd rather have it edited. They'd rather be able to point to it on YouTube or, you know, somewhere and download it in a podcast or something like that. So a lot of the sort of cultural metaphor that comes from television is, I am now live to the nation telling you this news about whatever. That is the myth, the cultural myth, that came from the technology. You know, back in 1950, you couldn't buffer anything. There's a crystal oscillator in Broadcasting House in the BBC, rubidium oscillator, that was the sync lock for the entire country. It broadcast the signal out over to the country, and every television set's flyback sync was locked to that. You know, that's the model that if you don't have any buffering, that's what you have to do. And it's an amazing piece of tech, but the problem is that metaphor sort of stuck and persisted. You know, even after we have, you know, gigabytes of storage in something the size of my fingernail that will hold, you know, several hours of television, we've still got this metaphor of, no, everyone watching the same thing at once. And so we took that to the net and realized that it wasn't actually that useful. You know, the only use we had it for Apple was watching Steve Jobs' keynotes, because a lot of people want to watch the same thing at once. And you know, if it's something everybody wants to watch at once, you're far better off using satellites. Satellites are really good at sending the same thing to lots of people at once. That's what they do. They send one signal down, it cuts in a continent. Right. Perfect for that. Using the net for that, not efficient, not useful. What the net is useful for is lots of people watching different things, and that was a key insight that got wrong over and over again. It's still got wrong by cable TV companies and telcos, because they have a central model. You know, cable TV is sending the same thing to lots of people, so therefore they build their net systems the same way. So they say, okay, our basic model is you have a lot of bandwidth down and not much bandwidth up, and that's because, you know, that's their basic model for television. Right. You think telcos will be smarter about this, because their basic model is people are talking to each other, but they get stuck on the live thing. They don't think stored is important.
They actually want to change the structure of the internet to make live more possible in their thing. But with what you're saying, I just really want to highlight what you're saying. It's really interesting. You're saying that almost all video in general will be stored, will be watched rather than live. Live will be more social, peer-to-peer. That's where it makes the most sense on the net.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the net, live is, well, and you don't necessarily need a full video back channel.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have something useful where you're watching something live but able to send questions back. So if you've got something like, and this is where the people who are doing live video now have got it right. People like Quick and Kite put up a little video window and a chat room next to it, and the assumption is the person sending the video can watch the chat room and react to the people in it, and that makes it useful and makes it interactive. And then they archive those little videos off so you can link to them, so they get the best of both worlds. But the live stuff, they've got that right. They've learned that method. You know, I was doing this, you know, at the first BloggerCon with Quicktime Broadcaster and IRC, and you know, had 50 people watching it who would ask questions, and I would feed them back into the room. That's a useful use of it, because you're connecting where you are to the rest of the world and bringing stuff back. But if you're not bringing stuff back, there's much less value to it. You're better off, in that case, either doing reportage or editing down or showing highlights.
So you've highlighted, so you've said that, you know, in software, don't take the metaphor, don't extend it where it's inappropriate. What other kinds of, for a computer developer, engineer, someone who's just entering the field, what other kinds of things like that would you say, sort of, based on your work?
So a lot of it, well, a lot of it is look at what people are doing. This is a key principle of microformat. So one of the microformats principles is you want to create a microformat. Stop. Don't create a microformat. First thing you should do is there an existing one you can use? The second thing you should do is, no, I found there isn't an existing one I can use. I can't use HCard for this. I need something else. Okay. Before you just make shit up, go out there and look what people are doing. Look how they're expressing this data on the web. Gather a lot of information and look at that. It's very, very easy to say, okay, I want to represent a person, therefore I need a name and maybe a phone number and an address and a photograph, and that will do me. But if you look at that, then you suddenly find that you haven't really thought about how names work in different countries, you haven't thought about how phone numbers work, how addresses work, you've just made up a bunch of fields yourself. If you actually go and look at what people are doing on the web, you're far more likely to find a different set of cases and go, oh, okay, here's a good schema. But if you actually go and look at, you know, HCard or portable contacts, what you will see is a bunch of derived wisdom from people who've, because in each of those cases, we looked at a lot of use cases on the web and came up with a good set of structure for that. Right. And there's a massive win in reusing other people's work. Part of this is, you know, a sort of software development cultural change I've seen in my lifetime, which is, you know, I was doing CD-ROM development. Now with CD-ROM development, you're making little shiny silver discs that you press 1 million of and you sell to people. And so the model has to be lots and lots of upfront design testing and QA, then you press these things and go out and try to sell them. And so you have a software development model that works on that basis. And you know, packaged software has been like that for a long time. So you have release cycles that are about a year long. You know, CD-ROMs, it was annual, there's a Christmas bump, but you have to deliver it in July in order for it to get pressed in time for Christmas. So, you know, timeliness is hard. But, you know, your model was, we've got a final release, we've got a list of features, we then have a phase with a list of bugs, we iterate on that until we're really sure it's good, and then we send it out and we're done. And then maybe we think about next year's edition after that. And, you know, there are bits of the computer industry that still run like this. Game development has a cycle quite like that. Some of the large systems have that. But the difference is now with the web, we can dynamically develop. We can build something, put it out there, see if it works, measure it, you know, control it, iterate, try variations, and keep moving from that. So we've got a software development process now that is much more like experimental. It's like, I'm going to build something, I'll try a few pieces out, I'll iterate and do that. So one of the things I'm seeing is that we're doing the same thing with specifications now. We're moving the standards process from something like, you know, to go all the way back to ISO or ITU, where it's assumed to be a 10-year process. And even W3C and IETF have this assumption that we're going to have a lot of upfront debate and publish a specification that everyone can use and go from that. Whereas what I've seen in the last few years, and you know, Microformats is maybe an outrider for this, but certainly with OpenID and OAuth and OpenSocial, what's happened is people have got together and said, okay, we can see there's a problem space here. Let's find the bits we agree on and publish that, and see what works, and then iterate that over time and, you know, and grow that. And there's there was a big OpenSocial birthday party yesterday where a lot of people got together. Today there's an OpenSocial spec get together where people are debating which bits go into 0.9. And what it comes down to is, if we've got consensus about this, it'll go in. Otherwise, it won't. But it's each of these hasn't been debated in the abstract. They've been debated based on practice. They have prototypes built that people can try out. That there's discussion on that basis. And then if there's disagreement, then that gets deferred. It's like, okay, this one's obvious. We all agree if we can put that in the spec. This other one, we disagree, we'll defer that, as opposed to we better hold up the whole spec, there's still disagreement on some corner case.